welcome to anyone who is attending today's Ad Hoc Bylaws Committee meeting. We are going to sit tight for just a couple of minutes, waiting for Susan Cox and Emily Secord to join us. So thank you for your patience as we wait.
And there's nobody in the participant room, so it's just us. So did you take some time off during the holiday, Michelle?
No, in my line of business, the end of the year is our crunch time. So it's kind of an all hands on deck situation.
Got it.
And it was pretty crazy. So
yeah.
I'm glad it's over.
Yeah. On to the next year, right?
Exactly. So how was the wrestling tournament?
We never made it.
Didn't make it?
me see, I got a message here.
Well, for the audio record, because I maintain an electronic audio record only for these public meetings now, so for the formal record, we should call roll, yes.
Sure, okay. I take a roll call. Michelle?
Here.
Susan Cox here, and we're waiting for Emily, but let's go ahead and begin. When we were meeting the last time, you were going to, Camille, you were going to put some things together, some language. Have you been able to do that? Or has it happened and I just haven't seen it?
Sure, I did, and it is included in the meeting packet that was sent out. And if you need me to resend that to you right now, I'm happy to.
Could you please? Thank you.
Yes.
And then I'll look at it. I'm still transferring over from work to Holt, and Michelle, do you have anything that you want to just bring up or talk about before we go to the documents?
No, I don't. Well, I don't know where we're starting. Maybe we should start with where we're gonna start. Or where we left off and where we wanted to get, you know.
Yeah, I apologize. I have the, was looking for the side-by-side and I don't see it on this version that I have.
Camille, can you bring that up? Can you just share that? The one that you sent out? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I apologize.
So the AIS is just the summary of what has transpired so far.
Okay.
And
so you know what? I am going to check out and come back in because I'm on my phone and I really just can't see this. So I'll call right back in. Thank you.
Okay.
Phones aren't good for reviewing documents for sure.
No, it isn't.
Okay. Thank you. That's so much better. I apologize for being so disorganized today. And did anyone else see this on the board, or did we keep it only with the committee at this point?
I sent it only to the committee at this point.
Okay.
So one thing you'll notice on this document too, that it originally went out and to everybody, and Gino commented, and so you'll see Gino's comments and my responses to him at the time. So
right.
And I believe, Camille, this one includes my comments now too, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
When you'd like me to move to the next page, just let me know.
I think we should start with, just the changes. I think they're incorporated as we had originally talked about them.
So Susan, do you want to call out which sections you want to?
Yeah, I'm just,
okay.
So I'm looking at section 1. Is that what's up on the screen?
Yes.
And it doesn't scroll down as I can tell. So we're talking about adding the Mackenzie River with the new districts. Is that going to be necessary to mention in this, or it's just going to be as is?
we could certainly add, Mackenzie area as part of our service district. I mean, it.
Do we, or do we just, because there could be changes later as well. So if it's just more general, then it won't matter if there are changes.
Yeah, and I think, these are, that it's, specific to individual cities, but we don't, we don't call out unincorporated areas, I guess, other than, the cities within our boundaries. I mean, we could certainly call, say, Blue River, for instance, because, that is a area we serve as well, a city, but I think it's incorporated.
Okay, doing that, will it matter in terms of then not making everything else as well? We're not being specific to every area, so does that matter? We'll just keep it as it is.
Yeah, and it's fine to keep it the way it is too, really. I mean, it's not,
Okay. Michelle, unless you have anything else, I think I'm ready to move to the next part.
Yep, I'm ready to move on.
I don't see anything here that we really need to go over.
Yeah, go ahead.
These were not things that we felt needed to be addressed. So I think we can keep moving. Okay, here we go. Oh, that's just a typo. So
yeah. And it looks like Gino had a question about
down below what talks about entering into the contracts, right?
Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like the concern was with anything other than it was just a little hard to follow.
One of the things that we had one of the things that we talked about is there are a lot of details in the bylaws that should they stay in the bylaws, or would they be more in policies and procedures?
So do we want to, we had that conversation, but if we're going to go through this process, do we want to just go through the things we've already determined we want to change, make sure that we kind of like how they, that change looks?
Can do that. Sure. I think we can do that, but I think we should decide which one of where would we move them from bylaws into policy and procedure?
Right. So did you keep a list of what those things were? I'm sure Camille has one.
We're talking, I think it was more of the bullet points.
And most of them have already been pulled out into the policies and procedures. So, you know, these are specific to bylaws.
Right.
And so, and you'll, you know, as you noticed in most of them there's a reference to a policy and procedure if there's a connection.
Right. Okay, let's move to the next one. Page 4. Okay, so do we really do bridges?
We do bridges.
Okay, so that needs to stay.
Yeah, we built 3 of them on our West Virginia MX project.
Okay. So it looks like we're down to, I think that was everything on that page, right? I can't see this yet. Whoa, okay. Michelle, did you you have something that you recommended to be there?
I think Camille actually already changed it. So instead of saying unlimited terms, it looks like it's redlined to say a director is eligible for reappointment for a 2-term limit.
Okay.
So I think that's
but that's determined by the governor, not by statute. So currently, it used to not be that way until Kitzhaber came in and he decided that it would be a 2-term limit. And Governor Brown has carried that out, but the next governor can come in and say, doesn't matter.
So should we change that to just say, or as determined by the governor?
I think so.
Good idea.
Then it's generic and it's not something we have to change every time it changes.
Yeah.
Okay, and welcome to Emily.
Hi, everyone. Thanks.
So it looks like then there's really no need to make any changes on 5 if we're staying with as appointed by the governor, whoever that would be.
Well, I think we just need to change it to be generic and not say a specific term and just say as directed by the governor or determined by the governor.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Michelle. Maybe it's a 2-term limit or as
directed.
Because currently it's a 2-term limit, but to Mark's point, it could change. So if we say currently it's a 2-term limit or as determined by the governor, I think that covers our basis for future.
Agree. Page 6.
So this is one of Gino's questions and Mark's responds, but Mark, do you know if that response to Gino, was he comfortable with that, or do we need to spend some time on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was comfortable with my response, but I'm not sure that, you know, everybody's still on board with that, you know, after the discussion at the retreat. So if board wants to spend a little time or, you know, clarifying that, it might be worth that.
I would like to have it be required, or that the general counsel to the board require the approval of the board.
So, and again, it's a general counsel to the district, not necessarily just to the board. And so how would you like to phrase that?
Well, I mean, the position is stated as general counsel to the board, not general counsel to the district. And certainly things that
where the board is being advised or consulted, seems like that really does have different obligations than for general for the board. I mean, there's contracts, I think once, Mark, you told me that, there's a number of attorneys or legal counsel that LTD has, but I guess I'm referencing specifically as it relates to board activity.
Could you move up one page, Camille? Because I can only see part of that.
Figuring where we're at.
Yeah, we're in 2 pages. Okay, there we
There
go.
we go.
That talks about the contract review board.
That's point 5, and then
Where does it talk about the general counsel in that part of it? Let's see.
yeah, that's just a contract review board there. So yeah, that's that does that. Yeah, that has nothing to do really with the general counsel.
Right. So when we get to that section, maybe
Yeah,
we can.
so we can keep on moving along unless you have something to about the contract review board.
So as is at this point, seems like it'd be fine.
For the review board.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree.
So now we're down to what, the public engagement? We're okay with the avoidance and reporting of discrimination and harassment. We have no changes there, I don't think.
I think there's a lot of wording in there that's probably in the policy other than that. But it references the policy for further direction.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I don't think that we should wordsmith, but I do think that there's redundancy and it's very wordy. It seems like it could be edited down to not be so long.
I can work with Camille on kind of reducing the words here, especially if we have the policy. So
right.
we can do that.
Thank you.
I just have one other comment on this. I also have a little bit of a concern about the part that says perceived by. I think maybe it needs to say, with an intention to, just because I think that opens us up for a lot of, just questions of, whether that was a concern that was raised by a board member versus someone who is intending to, cause harm in some way. So I think that would just be my feedback on that, just to kind of unmuddy some waters.
You're looking at a specific sentence, Emily? Or just asking to add that?
Yeah, I guess if we're paring it down and we're cleaning it up, I would just, sort of make sure that our intention of this paragraph captures that there's malintent behind someone's behavior, not just a perception of something going on, because otherwise there could be, 20 complaints every sentence that's made. So I'm just trying to be sensitive to everyone's concerns, but also be mindful that this is, it does cost the district money and it takes away resources from the community when we have to do investigations. So just trying to make sure that we're saying, is it perceived or is it, malintent behind behavior? So that would just be my feedback on that.
And my comment on that would be on the new DEI language. Intent is not really a consideration. It's the perception of whatever was said, right? And I mean, you can change it, but we could certainly, it may not protect the district or the board.
I feel like that's somewhat subjective. I don't really know how you would define intent. Emily, I think I understand the spirit of what you're saying, but in reality, who defines intent?
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's the exact same sort of concern that I have with the current verbiage. Is it's sort of like, you could perceive a situation however you want to perceive it. So that makes it challenging. And then at least I guess with intent, there would be, something behind it that we could say, yes, you did that. And yes, we, want you removed from the board, or yes, we want to, sort of take some further action. So just trying to get that a little more clear, but I agree with you guys. It's all very subjective, no matter what it says.
I think what, we would all like it to just be that we assume good intent, right? And then if there's something that falls out, if someone feels there's something that falls outside of that, there's always the possibility that that's going to come into some further, conversation or investigation or, something.
Well, then maybe it's a policy issue, Michelle. I like how it's a good point. So maybe it's more of a, let's have a conversation, sort of a peer review instead of just a complaint, because it just sort of feels like it goes from 0 to 60 really quickly, when I think there could be some really nice safeguards in place to just say, we want to be a respectful board and we want to have respectful relationships with everybody that we interact with. And if there is a perceived issue, here's what the, steps are, rather than, sort of an all or nothing, which I think is maybe where we got to where we got to, and at least in some regard.
Right. So I think if we pare this language down a little bit in here and focus more on the policy itself, we'll also have a little more flexibility to change the policy, as opposed to putting all of our eggs in this basket and having to change it here as well.
Yeah, good point.
Just to consider, at the previous meeting, all of you expressed interest in going through each of the policies as well. So what I have done for this meeting is I provided you this side by side specifically just to look through the bylaws. And then I, in addition, also included in your packet the policy handbook, so that you can take a look at each policy and decide whether or not you want to change any individual policy off of the full policy instead of off of the summary that's in the bylaws. So just so you know, that is there for you.
Thank you.
Right. So I really do think that anywhere we have this recap in the bylaws, but we have a policy that's now being referenced in the bylaws, if we kind of just stay kind of basic on the wording in the bylaws and we have the policies to refer to, I think it's cleaner and it's easier to alter at some point down the road if we decide we need to.
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, that the bylaws need to be considered as a more permanent document, so that every detail doesn't need to be in there. It's sort of the centerpiece, and then it's in the regulations and the policies where the specifics land.
Yeah, and I think this is another case where we may be able to whittle down the language a little bit in the bylaws, and keep the policy as the kind of guiding document.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Camille, you've really done a lot of work on this. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything I can do to make it less convoluted.
Okay, so page 7 on to 8.
So if you go back up just a little bit, Camille, because I think there was a discussion on the previous use of district resources. I know we were talking about the $50, if that's adequate, or and I'm not sure where we ended up with that. So I just want to make sure you're still okay with $50.
I thought we increased it.
I thought so too.
So there was discussion at the last meeting about this specific policy, but there was interest in reviewing the policy in its entirety before making a decision off of this summary synopsis. So that
So
policy is included in the handbook that I have attached.
So is this just maybe another area where we should remove kind of the specifics and keep it more general and then look at the policy and make our revisions to the policy instead?
Yeah. Because if we do it from 50 to 100, at what point do we do 150? So it isn't so much the amount as it is the spirit of increasing it when it's appropriate.
Right, that's why I'm saying maybe make this a little more
exactly.
generic and then focus our energy on the
Correct.
finer points in the policy.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Sorry, can you tell me where we landed on that? I caught all of it, but I didn't know what the decision was that Mark just said yes to.
Not including amounts,
Got it.
but more process.
Thank you.
Yeah, to keep it more general, and then have the specifics in the policy.
So no compensation for board-related expenses. Seems like all of this is going to be somewhat in all of the changes that we're talking about that have come into effect. Is that going to impact any of this or not?
I think that goes into the policy as well.
Yeah, and it could with the House bill that we've been discussing,
Right.
trying to figure out how it applies to us. And we're actually working with Salem and TriMet to figure out how they're interpreting it. Right now, Salem interprets House Bill 2992 as not applying to transit districts. And TriMet hasn't weighed in. So we're meeting with them this week or next week to try to kind of come to a determination on how we want to move forward with that.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but Mark, I don't understand how Salem thinks it doesn't apply.
Well, the language is not specific, and it actually is easy. It's pretty easy to go either way. And even the governor's office and legislative office is not certain. So there's a lot of uncertainty. It's a law that nobody really knew the consequences of or the exact application of. And so I think you can interpret it either way.
Okay, thank you.
That, whatever the decision is on House Bill 2992, the statute that it is amending is what is highlighted right here. So we could narrow this down to just say, shall receive per diem compensation as set forth in the statute and leave it at that, because then it's just a blanket cover for however they decide to amend it. And we don't have to get more specific.
Right. That's a good suggestion.
Right. And leave it referencing the policy where we would make any changes. And then there's, I think right up above that, Susan, there's some comment from Gino about, I think it relates to the resignation and removal area.
With regard to the no compensation?
No. I think there was something up above that.
Oh, okay.
That I
see Gino's. This needs some boundaries. Is that the part?
I think that's related to resignation and removal.
Ability to weigh in on that if it's the governor's office that's making the decision. I don't know if we can say there should be a boundary on that.
Well, he's saying it. Yeah,
so legally, the governor does make the decision, but the board can make a recommendation to the governor if they would like. They can recommend a board member be removed to the governor, but it is ultimately the governor's decision.
Right.
So I think that's what Gino's referencing is that piece right there. I think it looks like he would like to see that just maybe say based on failure of a board member to follow bylaws and procedures or something along that line. Not just because I didn't like the way you dressed this particular, you know what I mean? Nothing random, but to give it some tangibility.
Yeah, we could put a definer in there that says for violations of statutes, or talk a little bit about maybe some unacceptable behavior or something that references bylaws or policy.
Well, it could also to be just failure to comply with the stated responsibilities of being a board member.
Mm-hmm. I think it's about misconduct, right? I think where he's kind of going.
Yeah, and we can add some language in and bring it back next time. You can take a look at it. I think that would be fairly easy to do.
How would you say misconduct would also include, failure to, do the work, failure to, show up, etc.?
I mean, I think within reason, if you're missing like meetings regularly, I think that's probably, something that we would want to address.
I think that's what I was referring to, is that if there's not fulfilling the stated obligations of board membership.
I guess I'd like to see it say both misconduct and, sort of failure to.
Well, I think if we let Mark and Camille work on the wording, and we can see what that looks like, when we when we come back to this, we can kind of see where we land on that at that point.
Yeah,
Did Gino have suggested language or something that was more specific to address his concern?
No, I think your discussion though addresses it.
Okay.
So I think we've got enough to understand what you guys are trying to accomplish and be able to come back with some language.
Okay. So then on 2.9, uncomfortable with placing the clerk in the perception of, I can barely read this. It's so
In position.
small. Yeah, the gatekeeper of information. Thank you. Thank you.
So you're
has that been the position? Pardon?
Do you mind repeating that? I'm sorry.
Isn't it the tradition that the communication flows through the clerk of the board? Or is that a new responsibility, like Gino's suggesting?
No, my understanding is that it is industry best practice for communications to go primarily through the clerk of the board and the general manager. And this is how it has been for as long as I have been with LTD.
Right.
I think that insulates board members from the perception that we're speaking on behalf of an entire board when we maybe shouldn't be.
Right. So when Gino says he's uncomfortable with making the gatekeeper be the clerk of the board, I mean, is that a concern the rest of us share?
I mean, I've seen it done both ways. I've seen the board chair be responsible for communication to any, any communication from community or whatever. I've seen them take that role. So I think it just, what we think is best practice for our purposes.
Well, I agree that it's a lot to put on Camille or whoever is in that position, but it also seems like there's going to be more continuity if that's where it lands. And if that's been the tradition, I don't think there's a reason to change it. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Camille understands her role in that respect, and since she does kind of manage the public records and make sure that we are properly keeping track of things, that it's the appropriate place for that kind of communication.
I think it.
I can say that in my time with LTD, this has been a manageable responsibility.
I think it limits the opportunity for communications to be missed or not responded to as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I wish Gino was on this call. I'd like to ask him, what the proposed solution might be, or what sort of perceived problem he'd want to be fixing here. Just trying to understand how to capture that concern a little bit better.
I think what he's just saying is that it's Camille's sole responsibility by this wording to make sure that we get all the communication that we need. And that responses to community member emails or whatever all fall on Camille. And he's probably seen the same thing I have, where it's been the board chair that has had that responsibility.
I guess the one thing I do think is important to address, that it does put a lot of responsibility on this position in terms of identifying or determining, gee, is this important, or does it need to be forwarded on, or is it unimportant? So I think that part of it isn't the issue of actually manually doing the communication, but also the decision-making of determining what is important.
Well, and I think in point
I will say, sorry, Mark. This position does work very, very closely with the general manager as well, and any communications that come through, the general manager is always made aware of all of them too. So it is not just the clerk of the board making the decision on whether something is relevant or important or not. It's also the general manager. And there is always communication with the board member and coaching with the board member who may or may not need to respond to a community member. And if something is pressing, then it does go to the full board. We do have a pretty good process in place on the back end.
And quite often a board member doesn't have the information to actually respond to a community member about a specific thing that's going on in the agency. So we have to take it to staff to do some research to understand, the issues, so we can actually respond appropriately. And, and when we do, we keep the board in the loop.
So I think maybe my question here would be, how often are those communications received only by maybe one or two board members and the rest of us aren't aware of the communication? I mean, I think that maybe in the spirit of this too is, we might think something's important, or we just might want to be aware of what our community is asking. And, I think that might kind of come into some of the spirit here too, is who's making the decision as to what comes to the full, that communication gets distributed to the full board. How often does that happen or not happen?
It's pretty rare, actually. Most people come to staff, to me, if they've got, question about staff behavior or things that LTD is doing. Occasionally there's things go directly to the board. But usually they'll send it to the whole board and not necessarily one individual one, unless they've got a relationship with an individual board member or they're in their sub-district, they might, and it's a issue related directly to their sub-district. But it's still pretty rare, probably one every couple months.
I think this kind of works a little bit into our board working agreement when we go into more detail in there. And I think it's a focus on communication.
Agreed. Anything else, or can we move on?
I mean, I think I'm okay with what this says, as long as we cover the communication procedures and protocols, you know, in our policy.
I mean, if this is a process issue, then I think that's different than sort of the communications part, Michelle. I agree with you.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think we can deal with that somewhere else.
Camille, because you referenced that you do talk with board members or you do talk with the GM, do you feel like this bylaw sentence is accurate? I mean, you know, let's say, you know, it's not Mark or it's not Camille, and are we comfortable with the clerk being that gatekeeper if circumstances were different? Camille, I'd be curious what your opinion is, since this, you know, is so directly related to your role. Should that say with conjunction with or collaboration of XYZ, just so that it's really clear?
Sure, I'm comfortable with it. We could adjust the language a little bit to say, you know, the clerk of the board in collaboration with the general manager, if that makes the board feel more comfortable. Otherwise, you know, I have been comfortable with the responsibility, and I don't have any issue.
I was just sort of thinking about bylaws as this all works great today, but 10 years from now, what does it look like? And what do we wish it would have said? And I'm just trying to make sure that we're being really clear on what the expectation is and what the process is going forward. So I think we're getting there. Thank you for that feedback.
Well, I can say that this has been the process for about 8 years, just about at least 8 years. And I haven't seen an issue with it today.
Okay. Ready to move on?
Yes.
Was a little quick there. Okay, good. I'm going to scroll down because this is the tail end of that communication piece,
right?
Which I have made a blanket note for all of the policy references to shorten the language on all of them. So just so you know,
thank you.
I made that a blanket comment. So we will look at all of that. Let me know when you're ready for me to move it a little.
Can you go back up for just a second, Camille? Did we miss anything in that block above on the communication piece, or are we? I think this is a different question from Gino as far as what we're supposed to send to the clerk that doesn't already, like if Camille doesn't see it currently, it comes directly to one of us. What's our responsibility to getting that communication forwarded? I think that's kind of another question he's got here. So what are we required to send to Camille for public record, I think is what he's asking.
So if I think we talked about this at a board meeting a few meetings ago, but it has been some time, or at the retreat, I believe actually.
Yeah.
Any communication that any board member receives directly from a community member should be forwarded to the clerk of the board for public record, because that is all considered public record.
So I think this is another policy. We can deal with the detail of it there, but I just want to make sure we didn't miss his question. Okay, I'm ready to move on. Sorry, I just needed to read it and see what it says.
I saw a funny clarifying question. Sorry, this is silly, but does he mean in his personal email that he's getting this invitation, or does he mean in his LTD email? Because I would assume anything in my LTD email is available for review.
I think the question of personal emails came up as well.
So maybe we need a clarifying of this is this and this is that.
Right, but do we need to clarify it here, or do we need to clarify it in the policy that this references?
So your LTD email, anything you get in your LTD email is maintained on the district side. So with a previous board, part of my job was to also manage keep an eye on and manage the board members' email box, because there is one, you all have your independent email boxes, but it all filters also through a board member's email box. That was 2 boards ago and prior. The previous board, there was a board member that was uncomfortable with the clerk and the general manager being able to see board member those emails. And so the board had a discussion about it and opted to not have the clerk of the board and the general manager reviewing that email box. So I have not been for about 2+ years now. So that is something for the board to, again, decide. Do you want me reviewing that email box? It really, I think it was a misunderstanding under the previous board, because that is all public record. And so there is nothing confidential in there regardless. So it doesn't do any harm for me to be able to manage that email box. In fact, it is quite helpful for me to be able to do that, to ensure nothing gets missed, to ensure proper records are maintained for public record law, and so on and so forth. But that is something that the board could discuss again.
I guess one question I have about that seems incredibly time consuming. If you are reviewing all the email, that seems like an incredible redundancy.
Well, it helps to filter out a lot of junk email that comes into the board email boxes. As far as community member emails and any board business at all, it's actually more cumbersome and time consuming not to be maintaining that email box than if I were, because I'm not necessarily in the loop on everything. For example, board member state required training. I'm not in the loop on communications back and forth, and therefore it's much more time consuming for me to be able to assist or keep track of what has and hasn't been done when I don't have access to that email box. Prior to this previous board, it was a part of my job for the entire time I have been at LTD. So it's just a task to manage. It's not all consuming, and it was not too much to bear while I had that responsibility. I would recommend giving that responsibility back to the clerk of the board. I think it's in the board's best interest to have that support.
Well, whose responsibility is it to monitor it now? No one?
No one. No one.
Has there been, yeah, I guess I'd like to see that be something that the full board discusses, but
could be a great delegation to the secretary of the board too, just to, I mean, if there's a reason why it was changed 2 years ago, just a alternative option.
It was purely just a board member that I think there was not a full understanding of private sector versus public sector, and there was a desire for more privacy without the understanding that more privacy cannot be granted when you are a public servant.
Maybe this is something we can put on an agenda for a future meeting, as Camille suggested. I think there are a lot of ways to look at this. So, Michelle, are you ready to go on down?
Yeah, go.
Completed.
Yep. Move
okay.
ahead.
Emily, good. Okay, so 3.1, is that where we are?
Yes.
So, yep, elections.
I feel like we kind of covered this in our last conversation.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the wording has been changed to talk about that conversation. It looks like it's the same as what it was before to me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think we all agreed is that the part where the simple
general
majority, if they're a tie, the general manager would cast the deciding vote. I think that was,
Yeah, I think we agreed to remove
to
that.
delete that. Yep.
Yes, there was that conversation. I wanted to provide a true side-by-side as it was for you to see, so I did not change the language here yet. I wanted you guys to see everything you discussed fully first.
Okay.
I have a question. I absolutely agree about removing the GM from voting. Is there additional language or alternative in case there is a tie? Would we just revote until there isn't a tie?
I think it's by process, hopefully by process of elimination by number of votes each time.
Right.
Okay, agreed. Just didn't know if it needs to be in there.
At some point you have to come to a decision, right?
Okay.
So Michelle, did your questions, your concerns get addressed here?
Yes, I think we talked about it in the last meeting. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Moving on.
And I think Camille changed the language to remove the president assigning committee chairs.
It's hard to tell because it's all still in there. So.
Yeah. Scroll down a little bit. Yeah, I think she removed the part about, because it originally said that committee chairs were selected by the president.
Yes, I just had to read that really quickly because I was going, oh no, is it still in there? I swear I removed, I did remove it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't see it in there anymore. So that was my thing, is just, that's just not how we practice today.
Right.
So clarification, does the president appoint the members of, sorry, I think I answered my own question. So the president appoints the standing and ad hoc committees.
Right.
And may call for the creation of additional ad hoc. So I think that should say the board can call for the creation of additional ad hoc committees. Would that be more appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, that's how this happened. It was a board initiated action.
Okay, so I will amend the language to say the president and the board.
Mm-hmm.
Or a majority, or yeah, whatever language is probably fine there. Thanks, Camille. Well, and maybe it is redundant because I think the board as a majority could request anything. I don't like the last sentence. I'm like, well, if we have a president that's resigned and we don't have somebody reappointed, the board then as a majority would sign and facilitate blah, 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 blah. So maybe it's unnecessary. What do you guys think? Or does it add clarification that's needed?
I mean, I would think we would elect a new president before in most cases. Hopefully not. I mean, not to say that that's always the case, but I would hope that was our first action, would be to fill that spot. Yeah. I think that what we're all trying to accomplish is not putting as much responsibility on the president, but giving the full board a little bit more opportunity to weigh in on some of these things.
Yeah, I think just more support in general would be helpful. So maybe just the president or a majority, sort of as the president or a majority, just so that there's always that clarity. But then I feel like, you get halfway through it and then the whole thing says the president or the board is majority, and maybe there's a way to just address that as a one sentence at the beginning.
Right.
One of the things that I realize that this is more complicated than what it just says here, but the president shall act as the board liaison between the board, the director, and the board council. And one of the concerns that I've had for some time is there seems to be inequity in the amount of communication and information that is available to all of the board members. So I certainly understand that as president, they're the conduit to receive the information first, but then that information should then be distributed to everyone and as soon as possible so that all the board members have the same information at the same time. This makes it seem as if that other board members really don't have the opportunity to interact with staff, interact with board council.
And I get it's for efficiency and for, not just having a free for all at any given time.
Right.
But I think, just kind of given some of the concerns we've had over the last few months, that we do need to find a way to incorporate the board as more of a
body.
As more of a body, yeah, than
Right.
just, so, and I, but does that again just go to our working agreement policy where we're talking about communication and what those expectations look like? Because this here is saying that, the board president is the conduit, and I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with the tone of this. I feel like we still keep coming kind of back to the communication piece.
Can we table this until we review that policy further? Because it might be kind of a, cart or horse, which one should come first?
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Good suggestion, Emily. So are we moving on down to, let's see, I guess vice president, nothing there. Treasurer. So this is sort of, when you talk about has the authority to perform all duties, and they may delegate. I mean, isn't there, in practice, isn't it the LTD finance director? Shouldn't it just reflect that is what happens? Because is it the treasurer that delegates some of the duties to the finance director, or in fact, the finance director has those responsibilities? So it isn't because it's delegated by the treasurer, it's because that's the practice.
I guess I've never really understood the treasurer secretary component to this, because they're not acting really in, I mean, I know Emily signed some documents as secretary. I think I've seen some of those, but
well, there's a requirement to have an executive group for your board. I think that's part of a kind of bigger obligation. Right. So I think there are some kind of acting roles as opposed to sort of a formality of having that executive leadership team.
I could see that if there was actually an executive committee meeting happening.
And maybe that's the solution. Maybe that's the bigger conversation, Michelle, is maybe there should be an executive cohort, but I think that runs into quorum issues.
Yeah, I guess my experience with the school board was we just had a chair and a vice chair. We didn't have these other roles because those were handled by, staff administrators. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I've just been
yeah, I mean, by statute, is it required to have those positions?
Okay.
Camille,
I mean, I'm asking.
Yeah, Camille might know, but I think we are required to have the officers of the board, vice chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. Yeah. Knowing that the treasurer and secretary particularly are, really in title only, that their responsibilities are delegated to the director of finance and the clerk of the board.
So it doesn't seem accurate to say the treasurer may delegate or the secretary may delegate. I mean, can those just be removed? And then
they could. We leave it in there because it is because the statute requires that we have these, but the statute says that the authorities can be delegated. So it is technically an option. So it's left in there in case the board chooses not to, so that the board knows they have no choice.
Susan, are you thinking some clarification that those duties have been delegated, and to get them back to the treasurer or back to whomever, it would have to be, sort of a bigger board conversation? Is that you want some clarity around that, or do you want it to say in title only? I mean, I don't know how detailed you want that to spell out.
I mean, I think they're generic enough. I just didn't really understand the concept of it, but if it's a statute, then that makes sense.
I mean, sometimes I'm familiar with boards where the treasurer would be, for example, the chair of the finance committee, or serve kind of in that function. But I just think it doesn't reflect reality to say the treasurer may delegate. I mean, because then do they get to decide they're not going to delegate?
Well, the board could decide that.
But that's what I'm saying. I think instead of having it as that, to just reflect the reality. Something about the treasurer, I don't know. I just think that where it talks about the treasurer and the secretary may delegate, when in fact it's done.
Yeah, so for simplicity, I just removed that last sentence.
Exactly.
Yeah,
on both.
And that's fine. I mean, it's in statute, so it's fine. It doesn't have to be here. I think we just eliminate the sentence.
On both the treasurer and the secretary then.
Yep,
so I'm removing the language stating that they may delegate responsibilities, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, I'm going to remove that sentence.
I think maybe not remove it, but modify it. I'm sorry to be picky about that, because I think it's important that whomever serves after us is aware that that is delegated authority, right? So if you remove it, then it's sort of implied that that is, there is no room for the board to come back and say, hey, give that job back to the treasurer. Right. And I just want to be careful that we're not losing that just sort of line of sight down the road. So maybe the vice president, I'll use the treasurer. The treasurer has delegated some or all of their duties to the LTD finance director until, a discussion happens otherwise. Something like that maybe would be more appropriate in my opinion only.
What about if it says the board delegates the duties to the finance director and the board delegates responsibilities to the clerk of the board?
That would be more accurate. Oh, I think Michelle froze or is sneezing.
No, I have a thought. It's just hurting my head to kind of into words that make some sense. So at the time these positions are voted on, is there a process that, or is it just an understanding that these are going to be delegated? Like, is there a process? Is it part of the?
They've always
meeting
been
minutes?
delegated. Yeah, they've always been delegated. You know, there's never been a treasurer or a secretary that has actually, you know, done the books or taken notes.
Nor would I want to. If I were in one of those positions, I'd say no, thank you. But I guess, so my question maybe is, do we want to just maybe clarify that that is kind of a standard practice? But I don't know, I'm just kind of, I
But
get
if
where
it
Emily's
says-
saying some clarification would be helpful here.
Yeah.
But if it says the board delegates the duties to the LTD finance director, or the board delegates these duties to the clerk of the board.
Right, but we're not doing that. If we're, that's my question, is that actually an action that's being taken at that meeting when those officers are elected?
No, it's just a historical, you know, process really.
Right,
that,
so
you
the
know,
board is not, the board's not technically delegating anything. It's just kind of a, it's just a you know, this is just what happens.
I say remove the sentences.
Yeah,
I mean, you could really get into this, right?
Yeah, well, and you know, it kind of goes back to the whole board delegated authority of the board, right? You know, the board delegates the administrative authority for the district to the general manager, and so all of these things are actually administrative processes that the general manager oversees, but ultimately it's board responsibility, right? So it is kind of messy. Let us play with the language and see if we can come back to something, you know, based on your conversation.
Solution, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, we could have a wild and crazy treasurer secretary who says, whoa, give me the books.
I think they were crazy if they wanted LTD.
They would be, but that could happen. Crazy could happen. Okay. On to 12, I think.
Doesn't look like we had anything here unless we had some side notes from.
No. One of the, although it seems like there was a lot of detail that didn't necessarily have to be included in the text. Now, this is another example of paring it down.
That's in Article 4, as we talked about.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, it references an ordinance, so that might be something that we just need to look for redundancy.
Okay.
And we can do the same thing in 4.12.
These are all referenced by statute, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Move on.
Okay, so preparation for meetings.
I never got washed. So. Oh, it's wet. I think it's why I just dropped it. Okay, I'll put it with the other one. I'll leave it here if I could just sort that bottom drawer.
instead of saying in all cases, would it make sense, a priority, as a priority, if a director, instead of saying in all cases, I'm referring to the comments by Gino.
Gino's comment of, you know, to the extent possible.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there have been meetings where we've had things pulled just by, which probably could have been preceded, or, you know, could have been, that notice could have been given sooner, that the intent was there. But I don't think that you can make that a, you will always do that kind of situation. I think it would be a nice courtesy to give that heads up when you can, but, and that would hopefully be the majority of the situations.
I think the to the greatest extent possible language is probably okay.
Yeah, something like that. Just
Or even
kinda,
if it, yeah, if it starts with, if a director intends to request, you know, something like that, and at that point say, unless it's an, you know, it's an exception that they would not give the.
I mean, I understand that the spirit here is to give staff time to be able to respond to whatever concerns are there and not be put on the spot in a meeting, you know, to have to kind of try to sort through that really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it make it look like everybody was unprepared, right? So board members and staff, you know, like it's a surprise that something was on the consent agenda that needs to be pulled.
I mean, for me, this is kind of a courtesy conversation, right? What's the right thing to do to give staff time to prepare for the concern and still talk about it publicly, but have, you know, the information needed to have that conversation.
Or even to just say, as a matter of practice, if a director intends, then it's clear that that's the protocol that's supposed to be followed. But I don't think we need to.
Is this bylaw or is this the policy? Do you guys have a preference on where this lives? Does it need to be in the bylaws or is it really just more communication policy?
This might be one of those other, you know, another situation when we're looking at policies where we can, where we see that it's redundant and we can address it.
Largely bylaws. I mean, this is, you know, more meeting process. And bylaws refer to more meeting process where policies, you know, refer to, you know, other things. And so, yeah, so I mean, this is really part of a meeting process. You know, how do you want to handle requests that are, you know, to remove things from the agenda or the consent calendar or whatever. And, you know, and so, I mean, I agree, Michelle, that's part of the, you know, staff courtesy, but again, I think it's also kind of board professionalism, right? And so it's, you know, we want to look really pretty polished to the community when we can. And so while there are cases maybe that come up that when we pull something last minute, it would should be rare. So whatever that language looks like.
Professionalism, but maybe even more so just function so that we're not being inefficient when we could have addressed something or, you know.
Right.
So
we can play with the language as, you know, so it doesn't say in all cases, you know, and put something like, you know, it's a matter of principle or you know, so it isn't just a hard and fast rule, but it is, you know, encouraged.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything in 4.3 I could? Okay. So the one comment there that was agreed to, so that's going to be deleted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, general manager is not going to solve board arguments, I guess.
Okay. So that's been addressed.
And this is the earlier conversation, whether our personal email communications are also public record.
Okay. Yeah, this is another one that just seems overly.
Yeah, because it's a matter of statute and of,
Right.
of policies. So let us kind of whittle this down to, and as far as bylaws go, but have a reference to where the details are.
Thank you. That's helpful.
I think it's really good if we just keep focused on the fact that a lot of this is covered somewhere else and could change at any time. So if we're minimizing what it says here and just referencing, you know, we're better off when we see changes.
Yeah, I have a point of order question. Because the ad hoc committee was established for bylaws, do we need to circle back to the board and get kind of a second level of approval for policy revisions? I just want to make sure that we're not doing both if we've only been sort of authorized to do one.
Well, are we doing policy revisions, or are we just reviewing the policy?
Good question.
And looking at them in, you know, in relationship to the bylaws.
I think we're going to reach Emily's question is a good one, because when we start reviewing them, we're going to have things that we think should be changed.
Yeah, so just didn't want to, I guess I just want to make sure we're getting that clear, what's appropriate and where do we need to maybe circle back to the board and get that clarification. Or
well, and as we shrink language here to reference just those policies, we're going to want to make sure that some of this is incorporated in there. So
yeah, I don't think we're outside of our scope now, but I think we could get there. Michelle. That's what I was getting at. Sorry.
We can put that on the February board meeting agenda, just a discussion about policies and bylaws, or an update from the committee. Of course, you could do that probably in your committee updates anyway.
Right. And then if we need approval from the rest of the board, just to, you know, put a eye on the, or a dot on the I and a cross on the T.
Yeah, that would make me feel better. At least just more communication about what the scope of the project has increased to. Would we have to call for a vote for that, Mark or Camille?
I don't think that was not a formal action, really. It's you know, head nod by the board, or you know, by the board, and say, okay, yeah, why don't you, you know? So I don't think it has to be a formal vote. Camille, what is your thought?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I would think maybe after the edits that are coming after our meeting today, at that point, we may be close to wanting to send the revisions out to the full board so they can just have a sense of what's happened so far.
Well, and to be fair, I probably wouldn't feel really comfortable voting on bylaws pending policy changes, right? So if I know that we're reviewing policies and are going to have changes and we're removing language in the bylaws, I would say, great, I'd like to look at the policy changes and then the bylaw changes. So I just want to, I don't know, just make sure we're being efficient about the presentation.
I kind of think it's an all encompassing. look at what the changes are, because we're going to have changes here. We're going to have things removed that are going to be moved into a policy, or, you know, so I think it's important to have both pieces when we're making a decision on accepting.
Yeah, I'm not saying in terms of a vote. I'm just saying it in terms of an FYI, so that they're not looking at a huge, so that they see one thing at a time in real time as it's being done. I mean, I would appreciate having one and then better understanding how it's going to fit into policies. I mean, they can certainly look at the policies as well. I predict that perhaps some of the other members will want to serve on a policy committee, or they may want to have it be, you know, all of us on a policy committee. You know, that's just my feeling.
Yeah, I like that. So it'll be a, hey, we're checking in, giving you this update.
Yeah.
And by the way, as we've started this project, we have discovered it is not just
Exactly
policies.
Yeah.
Here's how we're going to lay that out for you so that it's not, you know, a surprise of all this information in your lap. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good, guys.
Yeah, I feel like in the spirit of we're doing this on behalf of the board, I think that the board should be able to see what's happening. So, okay, moving on.
So was, just so we know our role here in terms of timing, so as a recommendation after we're done here today, kind of get the changes put into the bylaws and then send them out to the rest of the board just to keep them up to date?
Sure. I mean, if there's time to do that. We have a meeting on the 5th. I don't know if it's practical to be able to have it done by then, but.
No, no, not by, that's Wednesday and that's a work session, but we could probably get it done by the next board meeting.
The 12th, I think.
Okay. Standing committees. Okay, so where are we on this? So I think we agreed that the committees were going to appoint their chair, which I think that was up in another section.
Right, and it's changed here.
Right. And any comments on this part? I think we've captured it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gino's just saying that the board president shouldn't have to consult with the general manager to go through this process, but I think I'm okay including the general manager because there are other things that, you know, staff time and things that could come into play.
Do you want to just say the board president may consult with the GM rather than implying that it must be? It's no difference.
I mean, I don't think it hurts. It generally happening in the course of a conversation at a board meeting anyway, would be my guess. Right, there's a discussion that happens at a board meeting that generally prompts the decision to put a committee in place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are you talking about the standing committees? Mm-hmm. Because these are like the MPC and the some of the committees where we're required to have representation, the Main Street McVeigh, you know, those kind of committees. So, you know, in those, you know, usually we will have a conversation with the board president when we're appointing, because, for instance, there's things that are specific Springfield that we might want to have both Springfield, you know, people on, and the board president may not understand all the committees. So anyway, so that was the point of that.
Are the standing committees, Mark, I think I remember you saying that the committees actually have changed. Some committees have been eliminated, other committees have been added, and I'm not speaking of ad hoc, but more of standing committees. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So the standing committees are primarily the community committees. Like I said, the the MPO, the CATA, some of those other committees that are included on with other public partners. So those are typically the standing committees, and they're 2-year terms. Internal committees are different. They're not standing committees. They could be, but they're really up to the board to decide whether they're going to have the committees or not, because we used to have, the committees that we just don't have anymore because the board didn't see the value in them.
Okay.
Okay, so I see the point of this then. So thanks, Mark, for clarifying that.
Okay. Emily, any questions? Are we ready to move on?
I do have one question though, Mark. Did a situation came out of the SPC recently as far as election of chairs? Do we need to deal with any of that conversation in this bullet point?
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, I think it's okay because it does say the committee shall have a chair elected by the corresponding committee.
Okay, as long as the committee agrees on who those representation or who can be that representation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I was just going to second what Gino's comments were, that I think that should still be the board president's role to appoint the committees and who's going to serve on them, but maybe with, again, that option to consult with the GM. I see the value of doing that. And I just like how he said that, yes, we should, it's a good idea, but it shouldn't be a requirement is still my question mark.
Okay, we're ready to move on.
This is the same information, it's just referencing ad hoc committees. So we can make that same change here.
I wonder if, I'm just thinking about the courtesy piece for the, removing something from the consent calendar. I wonder if there's a courtesy maybe that we as a committee, after a committee meeting, we send out a summary to Camille to include in a packet. I just feel like sometimes the reason why the committee reports are a little bit, sometimes really good, high caliber, and sometimes not so much, is that so much time has passed since the last meeting. It's sort of hard to capture those details. Is that too onerous, or is that helpful? Does that need to be in the bylaws or best practice?
So a few boards ago, it was actually board members' responsibilities to write up a summary and send it to me to include in that report. The board requested not to have that responsibility. And so what I do is I input the agenda information from all of the standing committees into that board member's report. So then that's to serve as kind of a memory jogger for the board member that was on that committee, of just listing all of the agenda items. So it's really up to the board, however they would like to have that facilitated.
It's a great point. Sometimes there might be some redundancy if it's already in the agenda meeting summary item.
Michelle, do you have any comments here?
I don't. I was just looking to see if that was something maybe we could incorporate in our working agreement as opposed to tying us down here.
Okay.
Michelle, are you making notes about your working agreement points? I feel like we've referenced that quite a bit, and I just want to make sure that those comments are living somewhere.
I'm adding notes to mine. I'm sure Camille's taking good notes too, though. So it looks like this may be where we have the conversation about general counsel and authority to remove.
Now, again, just a reminder, this is a synopsis. It's not the full policy. And that the full policy is in the handbook if you want to see all of it for full context prior to making changes off of the summary.
So do you all want to pare this down and review the policy, or do we want to address it here in the bylaw?
I think we can address it in the policy. I was just making sure I understand what Gino's comment is referencing here, so we don't miss what his intent is.
I think, well, my understanding of what he's saying is that with the exception of the contract for the general counsel, that the general manager has that authority. And Gino's questioning that. And I agree with that. And if it's a bylaw, then it's much stronger than if it's, just a policy.
The other thing I would say here is, do we want specific dollar amounts referencing, the new purchase authorities and all of that to live here? Because that's when that changes, this would have to be changed with that.
Or it could say as specified by the board. So it isn't an amount, but it's a specific amount, but the intent is that the board has to approve. And again, it's a number that could likely change.
Yeah,
well, right.
We could say pursuant to such and such policy.
Right, because we just changed that to 250, and if we were to change it again, we'd have to also change it here.
We could say approve LTD purchases with a financial or with a limit as determined by the board, or amount determined by the board.
So I think that would be captured well there.
So then, Camille, you're suggesting that we talk about the general counsel in conjunction with a policy as opposed to the bylaw?
No, I was merely referencing. I thought that you were talking about this section here, not wanting to list a specific amount, and that was all I was talking about.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the specific amount piece. I think we should probably make that more generic. But Gino's comment is asking us to add an exclusion of general counsel in this paragraph right here. And I do
It's
think
just-
just, you know, we've had an experience that has caused us all to be a little bit sensitive to that particular area.
Well, can I recommend that we
Well,
put something like, with the exception of the contract with the general counsel? Wouldn't that capture it?
That is a board and general manager conversation, not for the clerk of the board.
Right. I'm just saying, I'm suggesting that language.
Request is that we put the. Sorry, I'm just trying to guess there. So the general counsel would be excluded from this, and that would be the recommendation that we're suggesting that the board adopt.
So, yeah, and again, I don't know if you particularly wanted the bylaws, to tell you the truth, because there is we do have our purchasing policies, and it may make more sense for it to be in there because it really is a policy or procedure. And so it seems kind of out of place in the bylaws, I guess, to pull out one particular item like that.
Yeah, I kind of am leaning more towards paring this down like we've talked about in other sections, and then just kind of increasing the sort of scope and the side of the policy itself.
Yeah, and I can work with Wendy on taking a look at the actual language in this particular purchasing policy and revise it.
I'd also just caution us that, Michelle, I like that you said this was, sort of a sensitive based on recent events, but we also want to be mindful that the bylaws could be, 10 years from now, a completely different topic is sensitive. So I don't want to be too detailed or too generic at the same time. So just general comment.
Right. And that's why I think it's probably more effective to put a lot of these things that are inside the bylaws into policies that are referenced in the bylaws. Then we can be fluid as opposed to just tied down.
Sounds good.
Okay, Camille, did you capture all that?
I have captured that you guys are going to have further discussion regarding the full policy. And this is going to be, this section is going to be slimmed down.
Yeah, and I'll work with Wendy on the purchasing policy for that, Camille. So.
Okay. So is that going to include everything and, down to the part where it says general manager's absence? Is that staying as a bylaw?
Yeah, the part we were talking about just had to do with the purchasing authority of the general
Right.
manager.
So the rest of it is staying as bylaw.
Unless the board prefers it not to be part of the bylaws.
I was just asking for clarification.
No, I think that's a really good question, Susan. I guess I was under the impression that it would be that entire section would be kind of potentially slimmed down, assuming it would be represented in the policy instead. But I think good to kind of clarify.
Some of this, I think we might want to leave here until we get to the policies, just because there's a lot right there. And if we start taking it out, we might regret that.
Right. I mean, for example, the general manager may employ any professional support and so on. Seems to me that's policy. I mean, assuming it's under the 250,000.
Yeah.
Well, there's general statute that basically says the general manager has all authority over the administration of the district. And so, and I don't know that it's it's specifically defined, you know, what that means anywhere. So I'm kind of agreeing that until we kind of take a look and see if it's defined anywhere else, maybe keeping it here for now would be wise. And, you know, if we find it somewhere else, great. But I don't recall that we have that outside the statutes that are fairly brief. Unless Camille, are you aware of any?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, I would just caution us to not take too much out until we really know where that particular information is sitting.
Agree with that. So we're leaving most of it here for now with the understanding that parts of it will go into policy, but we're going to wait until we see how those all kind of connect to each other.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so moving on. Okay, I don't see anything here that we. So we ready to move down to pass the amendments?
With the amendments, I kind of read through Chariot's bylaws and I liked the wording in there. And I don't remember exactly why at this moment, but I thought it was pretty clear. And then the only other, so in comparing our bylaws to Chariot's, they had an indemnification area too that I thinking we might want to take a look at that and see if we want to consider putting that in here.
Where would you insert that? Where are you thinking?
It's at the end. It's right here in the amendments. It's
right. It says,
oh, there's the indemnity.
Yeah. Are you thinking something additional to that?
I just like the way it's worded. So, and it's just those two sections in Chariot's bylaws that might be worth taking a look at and seeing if it's some, you know, if there's some parts of that we might want to incorporate in here. They were pretty clear in their message.
All right, we can do that. All right, and with that, I need to go catch a plane. So thank you all for your time.
Mark, are you sure it wasn't canceled?
Well, no, I'm not sure. Actually, they've been canceled all week, so I've been trying to get home. I've been trying to get home for a week and haven't made it yet. So
we're crossing our fingers for you.
All right, thanks everybody.
Happy New Year.
Safe travels.
So
I hope you can
what's left?
Just reading to be hung up. Oh goodness.
So what's left in this document is just the original bylaw sections, in which I referenced, you know, how all of the changes were made, like these sections moved to Article 4 and so on. So there's 10 minutes left in the meeting. Would you like to take a look at, looking at any of the policies, or how would you like to use the remaining 10 minutes of this meeting?
All of the, I just want to make sure there wasn't anything in the rest of the document.
No, there's not.
That was okay. Thanks, Camille. Sorry, I just want to clarify.
It goes into the policy handbook.
Right. I guess I think that 10 minutes is not enough for us to really start digging into any of the policy stuff. What did that, Michelle, Emily, what do you think?
I'm still reluctant to move forward into policies. I think we see the purpose and the intention of it, but I just want to make sure that we sort of have the full buy-in from everyone else before we do a whole lot of work without sort of, I don't want to say permission, but just sort of understanding.
Agreement, yeah.
So I agree we don't have time to start digging into this. And I want to pay attention to Emily's concern that we make sure the board understands what we're tackling next. I would just suggest maybe we do some homework and start looking at those policies and how they compare to the bylaws and where we might want to, you know, beef them up or move out and into the policies, just kind of get our heads around that.
Right.
I think that would be really wise and give people maybe the heads up, Susan, when you're giving that report, that we may want their feedback as well along the way. So
Right.
if they could add it in now instead of later, that would be a lot more productive for all of us.
Right, right.
And I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I'm sort of at a place where maybe right before we're kind of finalizing our recommendation, it might be nice to just sit down, maybe grab lunch and kind of sit down together and do this. I'm kind of feeling a little bit disjointed with all of the what I have here in front of me and then the technology piece. So I don't know if that's comfortable, but I think that would be really helpful just to say, we're good, move on, or, you know, I still feel a little uncomfortable with that.
Maybe we could schedule something in the boardroom at LTD and just bring in some lunch or, you know, do some, I would be fine with that.
Yeah, whatever is comfortable for everyone. I think that would just, for me, I'm at a place where I'm like, okay, I think I'm in agreement with everything, but I'm also just feeling maybe a little scattered with all of the
So you're so Emily, this would be after the next edited update from Camille. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, especially if we're going to start saying, here's bylaw, here's policy. Right. I sort of feel my kind of brain going, oh boy, I'm already feeling a little, which draft am I looking at and what note do I need to pull over to this one?
Right. Yeah, I think there'll be more clarity when we see the next version. Camille, do you have anything else you would like to add or suggestions, recommendations?
Well, just regarding next steps. So would you like to go ahead and schedule the next meeting right now while you can all look at your calendars? Are you wanting to hold that before the January regular meeting or in February? What are you thinking?
So we have a meeting on the 5th. The next meeting is the 12th.
No, the next is always the third Wednesday of the month. So that would be January 19th.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a different, LCC, not LTD. Okay. So.
I'll start with an L.
Yeah.
I would say maybe after the next board meeting, we get that, buy-in / approval, and then maybe we meet after that just to give it, a couple weeks to get the edits done, and then a couple weeks for us to get through the policies. I think that's going to be kind of a heavy lift.
Okay, so that would be after the 19th. Do we want to schedule it now? What's your pleasure?
So is that one scheduling, that's the scheduling of this in-person sit down, or after we kind of do our own homework on blending the bylaws into some of that into procedure? Is that what we're saying?
What about Wednesday, the 26th?
Wednesdays are not good for this girl.
Okay. What works for you? What days are better?
Just about anything but Wednesday I can make work. Wednesdays are just tough for me. I've got a lot going on that day.
What about Thursday, the 27th?
I don't think I have probably any conflicts on my calendar. I don't have it right here with me, but I can certainly reach right back out as soon as I get back to my office to let you know if that's a conflict.
Emily, what about you?
That is not good for me. I'm actually going to be traveling that week. So if I could do the 4th or anything the week of the 7th. Sorry to push us out a little bit.
Of February.
So
yeah,
you're
unless
saying
we went right after the board meeting, like the 20th or the 21st, I could do. Otherwise, I'd be looking at, kind of the week after the 27th. Like the 4th or the 7th, 8th, 9th. Sorry, guys.
So I'm fine with either one of those options.
So Monday the 7th? Camille, does that work for you?
Yes, it does.
12 to 2 again.
Would you like to do a 12 to 2 again?
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing a lunch, sure. Okay. All right. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Thanks, guys. I think that was really productive and we ended early. So, I mean, what can we do?
Win-win.
Maybe that's a good sound. Maybe that's a good omen. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Enjoy your day.
Bye.